The vastness of space shimmered beyond the curved windows of the Imperator's Wrath, a colossal battleship floating above the pale blue of Earth. From his throne of black alloy, General Varric studied the planet below, his molten gold eyes filled with disdain. This was humanity, this fragile world, this insignificant species that had dared to defy the Dominion. He exhaled through his sharp fangs, the sound more a growl than a sigh. This should have been over days ago. Across the command deck, his officers stood in disciplined silence, their elongated forms rigid with anticipation. The Dominion had raised civilizations far more formidable than this one. The XY Theri, the Vrun, species with armadas, warriors bred for war. And yet, none had withstood the inevitable advance of the Dominion's might. Humanity would be no different. And yet they had not surrendered. Not yet. A low chime signaled an incoming transmission. Varric flicked a clawed hand, and the holographic display in the center of the room shimmered to life. The image of an aging human, clad in what passed for military attire, appeared. His face was lined with exhaustion, yet his expression remained firm. Admiral Quinton Ross, Earth's appointed leader of planetary defense. "This war is over," Ross said without preamble, his voice steady but hollow. "Your forces have crushed our outer colonies. Our orbital defenses are in ruin. The United Earth Alliance has been dismantled. There is no need for further bloodshed." Varric allowed himself a slow, predatory smile. "Ah," he purred, voice deep and resonant. "At last, reason finds its way into your kind." He leaned forward, resting his clawed hands against the armrests. "And so, humanity kneels. A wise decision, if disappointingly belated." Ross's expression did not shift. "No," he said, "we do not kneel." Silence pressed upon the bridge. Varric's amusement flickered. "Then why waste my time, Admiral?" Ross inhaled, as if steadying himself, then continued. "You misunderstand. I am here to make one final offer." His voice hardened. "Withdraw your forces. Leave this system. Do this, and there will be no further conflict." The words hung in the air, absurd in their audacity. One of the officers let out a low hiss of disbelief. Others exchanged wary glances, as if uncertain whether they had misheard. Varric chuckled, then laughed outright. It was a deep, guttural sound that echoed across the bridge. "Fascinating," he mused, amusement returning in force. "Do you believe I am blind to your desperation? You speak of offers as if you hold any leverage. I could order my fleet to reduce your planet to ash before your next breath." Ross did not flinch. "You could try." Varric's laughter ceased. He stared at the human, intrigued despite himself. There was no bravado in the Admiral's voice. No fear. Something was wrong. Ross continued, his words calm, deliberate. "I have no fleet left to send against you. No army to deploy. No hidden weapons that will turn the tide." He leaned slightly forward, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the transmission. "And yet, you will not win." Varric's fingers tightened around the armrests. "Enlighten me, then," he said, voice edged with irritation. Ross's expression remained unreadable. "You don't need an army to win a war," he said. "Just one soldier is enough." The transmission cut. For several long moments, the command deck was utterly silent. Then, a scoffing noise from Varric's second-in-command, Commander Zyros. "A bluff," the officer sneered, his plated exoskeleton shifting as he folded his arms. Desperate words from a doomed race. Varric's claws tapped absently against the armrest. "Perhaps," he murmured. He had no doubt humanity was finished, but something in Ross's delivery unsettled him. Not fear, not submission, certainty. He turned his gaze toward the holographic display of Earth, watching as the Dominion's warships hovered like storm clouds over the planet's surface. A single soldier? It was laughable. And yet, as he gazed into the void, Varric could not shake the smallest whisper of unease. A fireball streaked through the void, tearing across the Dominion fleet's defensive grid. Alarms blared as tracking systems struggled to lock onto the incoming object. Automated turrets adjusted, their barrels glowing as they unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. But the target was small, agile, weaving through the storm of energy with unnatural precision. Inside the projectile, Captain Elias Kane remained motionless, his breathing steady as he watched the countdown display on his visor. His drop pod vibrated violently, the outer shell glowing from the friction of atmospheric entry. It wasn't his first orbital insertion. It wouldn't be his last. The Imperator's raft loomed ahead, a floating fortress of metal and malice. The Dominion's flagship, the heart of their invasion force. The perfect place to end this war. The impact was brutal. The pod punched through the outer hull like a meteor, tearing through layers of reinforced plating before embedding itself deep within the ship's structure. The crumpled remains hissed with cooling metal, smoke curling from the ruptured seams. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a pneumatic hiss, the hatch blasted outward, embedding itself in the opposite wall. Kane stepped out, his armor gleaming in the dim emergency lights. The suit was heavy, reinforced with cutting-edge adaptive plating, but it moved like a second skin. A rifle was slung across his back, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. The corridor ahead was empty, but not for long. The ship was alive with activity. He could hear the distant thunder of boots, the urgent crackle of alien voices over the internal comms. He activated his visor's tactical overlay, scanning the layout. The command deck was his destination. The shortest route would take him through multiple security checkpoints, heavily defended positions designed to repel full-scale boarding parties. He was just one man, but one was enough. The first wave arrived fast. A squad of Varric shock troopers, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the flickering lights. They moved with precision, weapons raised, mandibles clicking as they spread into a formation. Their leader barked a challenge in their guttural tongue. Kane moved before they could fire. A flash of motion, faster than they expected. He closed the distance in a blink, slamming his fist into the nearest trooper's chest. The kinetic force sent the alien sprawling, its armor caving inward. Before the others could react, Kane twisted, grabbing a second soldier by the throat. With a single powerful motion, he drove the alien's head into the metal floor, cracking its skull with a sickening crunch. The remaining troopers opened fire. Kane moved like a ghost, his armor's reactive plating shifting in response, deflecting some shots, absorbing others. He drew his sidearm, a sleek, matte black weapon designed for precision. 3 quick shots. 3 bodies fell. The silence returned. Kane exhaled slowly, his muscles still coiled for the next attack. He took a weapon from one of the fallen troopers, slinging it over his shoulder. He would need it soon. The Dominion was learning. The next wave would not make the same mistakes. High above, in the command center, General Varric watched the security feeds with narrowed eyes. His officers murmured in confusion, disbelief creeping into their voices. A single human had boarded their ship. A single human had just carved through their elite forces like they were nothing. Varric's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. He had underestimated them. No, not them. Him. Seal the inner corridors, he commanded. Deploy the war forms. I want this human reduced to atoms. His officers scrambled to obey, but deep in his chest, a foreign sensation twisted. Not anger, not pride. For the first time in decades, General Varric felt fear. The walls trembled as the Imperator's raft shifted to high alert. Kane moved through the corridors with mechanical efficiency, his mind calculating every angle, every possible route to the command deck. His boots barely made a sound against the reinforced flooring, but he knew silence wouldn't protect him for long. The Dominion had adapted. The next encounter would be different. A bulkhead slammed shut behind him, sealing the path he had just taken. Another hiss closed ahead, cutting off his route forward. A voice crackled through the ship's internal speakers, deep and resonant with fury. "You are not a soldier," Varric growled. "You are an infestation." Kane ignored the voice. His visor's HUD flashed a warning. Pressure shifts in the adjacent corridor, a telltale sign of something big moving into position. He took a steady breath and stepped forward just as the wall to his left erupted. A war form burst through the metal plating, its hulking body covered in thick, chitinous armor. 8 limbs, each tipped with serrated claws, unfolded as it let out a bone-rattling screech. The Dominion's war forms weren't soldiers. They were living siege weapons, bred for planetary assaults, capable of ripping through reinforced bunkers with their bare hands. Kane didn't hesitate. The war form lunged, claws flashing. Kane sidestepped, barely avoiding the strike as the metal beneath his feet split open from the force of impact. He ducked under a second swing and fired a burst from his stolen plasma rifle. The shot struck the creature's torso, but the thick plating absorbed most of the damage. Too slow. Kane twisted, launching himself up the creature's arm, using its own momentum against it. A combat knife flicked into his hand, the monomolecular blade humming as he drove it deep into the warform's neck. The beast howled, its body convulsing as it slammed against the walls, trying to dislodge him. Kane held on, twisting the blade before yanking it free in a spray of thick, black ichor. The warform staggered, its screech turning into a wet gurgle before collapsing to the floor. Kane landed lightly, already moving. He didn't have time to admire his work. Above, in the command deck, Varric watched the feed in stunned silence. His war forms were not meant to lose. Not to one human. Enough of this, he snarled. Flood the corridors. Burn him out. A deep rumble vibrated through the ship. Kane recognized the sound instantly. The Dominion was purging entire sections of the vessel, venting them into the void or flooding them with plasma. He sprinted forward, his visor marking the safest route as walls behind him glowed molten orange. The command deck was close. One last corridor. One last fight. Varric rose from his throne, his molten gold eyes narrowing. He flexed his claws, exhaling slowly. If the human wanted to challenge him, then he would grant his wish. For the first time in his life, the general would fight a battle with his own hands. The doors to the command deck slid open with a heavy hiss, revealing a vast chamber bathed in the cold glow of holographic displays. At its center, General Varric stood waiting. His golden eyes burned with something deeper than rage, something heavier, sharper. Recognition. Kane stepped forward, his posture relaxed but precise, like a predator that had already decided the outcome of the hunt. His armor was scorched, the edges of his combat knife still slick with the black ichor of the war form he had gutted moments ago. Yet his breathing was steady, measured. Varric's officers lined the walls, their elongated forms tense, hands hovering near their weapons. But none moved. Not yet. The general let the silence stretch between them before speaking. "I know what you are now," he said. His voice was calm, controlled. "I have seen warriors. I have killed legends. But you are something else." Kane tilted his head slightly, considering the words. Then he smirked. "If you say so." Varric exhaled through his fangs, a low, rumbling sound that might have been laughter. "Your kind calls us conquerors, but we are more than that. We elevate the weak, absorb the strong. We shape the fate of entire species." His claws flexed, the tips gleaming under the artificial light. "And yet, here you stand, alone, as if you, a single soldier, could shape mine." Kane's fingers tightened around the grip of his knife. "That's the thing about humans," he said. "We don't fight for survival. We don't fight for conquest." He took another step forward. "We fight to end the fight." Varric moved. For all his size, the general was fast. Clawed hands lashed out, a blur of motion meant to tear through flesh and bone in a single strike. But Kane was faster. He ducked, pivoting on instinct, his blade flashing upward. The tip of the combat knife scraped across Varric's armor, not deep enough to wound but enough to leave a mark. The general grinned. "Good." They clashed again, a brutal exchange of speed and strength. Varric's blows could shatter steel. Kane avoided them by the barest of margins, his own strikes precise and surgical. He wasn't fighting to overpower the general. He was fighting to bleed him. A cut across the ribs, another at the shoulder. Small wounds but deliberate, measured. Varric felt them. Kane saw it in the way his stance shifted, the way his movements grew just a fraction slower. The officers watched in stunned silence. Their general, the greatest warrior of the Dominion, was being pushed back. With a snarl, Varric lunged one final desperate attack. Kane sidestepped and drove his knife deep into the alien's side, twisting it. Varric let out a shuddering breath, golden eyes wide. Then, slowly, he felt his knees. Blood pooled at his feet, thick and dark. He looked up at Kane, something unreadable flickering across his face. Not just pain, not just disbelief. Understanding. "You were never just a soldier," he murmured. Kane withdrew the blade and stepped back. The officers remained frozen, their eyes darting between their fallen leader and the human standing above him. For the first time in Dominion history, the silence was not one of discipline. It was fear. Kane turned, activating his communicator. "It's done," he said. The transmission went out, a single message that would echo across the stars. The general of the Dominion had fallen, and with him, the Empire itself.